this is Colin Liddell, and this is the Shortpod, a brief and succinct podcast commenting on the events and issues of the day. And today it is the 2nd of October 2022. Now, the topic foremost on my mind today is British politics and the interesting synchronicity that seems to exist between the two main and dominant political parties in the UK, namely the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. Now, it might sound a little counterintuitive to talk about synchronicity between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, as they seem to be quite independent and opposed entities. And it seems quite a trite talking point to merely compare them to two cheeks of the same arse, etc. No, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are indeed very, very different. But that does not mean that they cannot be synchronous in the way that they operate. Do I have special inside information on this? Unfortunately not. All I have is my ability to understand and recognise patterns. Anyway, to push on, the point that has struck me recently is that in both cases, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, both parties replaced their previous leader without actually a very, very good reason to do so. And that also suggests something a little bit deeper going on. So I want to talk about that. Now, the present Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister is Liz Truss, as we all know. Her stint as Prime Minister has already generated copious headlines around the world, mainly for bad reasons at the moment. She replaced Boris Johnson. And of course, why was Boris replaced? He hadn't actually, as I said in a previous podcast, shat the bed. He hadn't actually done anything that remarkably wrong. In fact, you could say that Boris was a popular Prime Minister. He was doing relatively well under difficult circumstances. He was dealing with a war in the Ukraine. He was dealing with the fallout of the COVID pandemic. And he was doing things that generally were successful or at least popular. But nevertheless, one artificial scandal after another was generated. Partygate, another scandal about one of his chief whips, a gay man, fondling another man, etc., etc. And all this seemed to be constantly cooked up and reheated by the media until Boris was finally pushed out of the leadership, allowing Liz Truss to be shunted into his place. At the time, I just thought this is a sign of people being a bit hysterical, possibly itself the result of the lockdown, etc., etc. But more recently, it struck me that it's got so many similarities to the way that Jeremy Corbyn was kicked out of the Labour Party leadership in 2020. Now, of course, I'm not a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not a supporter of Boris Johnson or any of these mainstream politicians. But once again, Jeremy Corbyn, he was an opposition politician. He wasn't in government. It's very, very difficult to make a mistake if you're not in government as a politician. An opposition politician has things quite easy. His job is just to be popular within his own party and to criticise the government from time to time, which is what Jeremy Corbyn was doing. He seemed to be very, very successful in that. He was popular with the Labour grassroots. There was almost adulation of Jeremy Corbyn in some quarters of the Labour Party. But nevertheless, without being in government, without having to make any difficult decisions, Jeremy Corbyn was attacked again and again on very, very specious grounds until he was forced to quit as leader, allowing Sir Keir Starmer to be installed. Now, in the case of Jeremy Corbyn, it wasn't Partygate, it wasn't petty scandals about the COVID lockdown. I think his leadership predated COVID slightly by a few months. What they managed to get Jeremy Corbyn on was anti-Semitism, air quotes. There's been some reporting recently on a channel, Al Jazeera, about this, about how anti-Semitism was sort of weaponized in order to push Jeremy Corbyn out of the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn is not in the least anti-Semitic. He's not in the least racist, except, of course, he, like all left-wingers, he probably hates white people. There was nothing they could really get on the guy in that respect. But because he's a lefty, because he sees the Palestinian people as being somehow oppressed by the State of Israel, they were able to push the meme that Jeremy Corbyn and other people in the Labour Party were being increasingly anti-Semitic by criticising Israel. Of course, if you dig deep enough, you'll find, confirmation bias evidence that will allow you to support almost any theory. And of course, there are people in the Labour Party from Muslim backgrounds, etc. There are people who are extremely critical of Israel in various ways, who maybe overstep the mark with some of their comments. So they were able to patch together this idea that the Labour Party was riddled with anti-Semitism and that Jeremy Corbyn was really responsible for all this. And they used that to kind of shunt him aside. Now, one of the most interesting points about this recent reporting on this so-called anti-Semite gate scandal in the Labour Party is that an anti-Israeli Jewish group put forward the figure that Jewish people in the Labour Party were 5 times more likely to be accused of anti-Semitism than other members of the Labour Party. Yes, 5 times. So for Jews in the Labour Party, you are first in line to be accused of anti-Semitism. And this is because a lot of these Jewish members of the Labour Party are, of course, like Jeremy Corbyn, kind of critical of Israel's policy towards the Palestinians. So both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn were kicked out of their respective parties without the voters being involved. These were effectively coup d'etats, and the 2 present leaders that we have now, Sir Keir Starmer and Liz Truss, are effectively stooges of some kind. Now, why this has happened is another separate but also very, very interesting question, and I do have some theories on that too. But this is the Shortpod, so I'll wrap up here. Over and out.